Well, let's bring in Rami Khouri. He's in the city of Boston, where he's a distinguished public policy fellow at the American University of Beirut. Rami, welcome to the program. So these talks have been going on for 15 hours. We've had very few leaks to the media about what's actually been decided, if anything at all. Could we see this as a sign that diplomacy could be working here, given what we've actually seen play out over the last 6 weeks of this war?
Yes, Yashini, I think this is a very positive sign that the talks went on for so long. They met face to face. They agreed to take a break, and they're going to meet again in a day or two. Those are all very positive signs. There's also been reports, pretty credible reports, that some issues have already been agreed upon, like lifting some of the sanctions quickly and releasing some of the money Iranian money that's been blocked, frozen, something like $26 billion around the world. So there are issues that can be quickly agreed on to get things moving. And then there's the really tough, big issues, which really you have to call the sovereignty issues. The issue of enriching uranium to levels that are not a threat to anybody. That's a sovereign right, and the issue of passage through the maritime the waterways that are the sovereign waters of Iran or Oman. The Strait of Hormuz is not an international waterway as legally defined because it falls within the, I think, 12-mile limit of each country. So these are issues that require serious negotiation, and they're getting it. I think the level of the delegations is significant. The American one having the vice president, the rest of them not so impressive in my view, but still they're there. And but having the vice president there is a good sign. And the senior Iranians and the large number of Iranians from many centers, all the different power centers in Iran, that's a very good sign. The Lebanon issue really is a big one. The Iranians insist that the ceasefire must include no more Israeli attacks on Lebanon or Hezbollah attacks on Israel. The Israelis reject that, and they've carried out a massive attack a few days ago that killed almost 300 people in Lebanon. So that has to be addressed, and that takes more work. But I think Hormuz is solvable. The enrichment is solvable. The other one that's really tough is the Iranian missiles. The Americans say they don't want any Iranian missile capability that could ever threaten anybody. And the Iranians say their missiles are defensive, and it's a sovereign right to defend your country, which, of course, every American politician says 3 times a day when they're talking about Israel's right to defend itself. But the Iranians are saying we have a right to defend ourselves. But these are also issues that can be negotiated. That's what negotiations do. I've been involved in Palestinian Israeli meetings, unofficial meetings over the years, track 2 diplomacy. And it takes a day or two for people to get comfortable with each other, and then they speak honestly to each other, and then they identify the areas where they're not so far apart, where both sides can benefit. Every party has to go home saying we've achieved our key goals. And to do that, you've got to let the other side achieve some of its key goals. And I think we're seeing that happening right now. I think you can pretty much ignore what Donald Trump says. Unfortunately for the Americans, a fine country with a very bizarre president, but still that's what he's like. And he says, we've won, we don't care. You can just ignore what he says. What comes out of Islamabad, I think, is much more important, but we've got something moving here. And the big element in the end is going to be weaving all of these things together into an agreement that the American Congress has to approve, that the Islamic Shura Council has to approve, and that the UN Security Council probably has to approve. So this would be really historic, but it takes time for these things to happen. So we're probably going to get an extension of the ceasefire for weeks or months, and then more negotiations to finalize an agreement that could then be a peace agreement. And this is going to be really significant on the Palestine, Lebanon, Israel front as well, because it means really reining in the genocidal, violent instincts of the Netanyahu government in Israel in a way that's never been done before. But this is something the Americans have to reach deep into their soul and come up with the confidence and the power to finally rein in the runaway Israeli killing machine.
But Rami, it would be interesting if this eventually does extend into a permanent deal between the US and Iran, because then it makes you wonder, how is Israel, Netanyahu, who addressed the Israeli nation just a few hours ago about this very issue, is now looking at these ceasefire talks? Because you mentioned J.D. Vance there, and it's widely known that he was against this war, but said to President Trump, I'll support you anyway because you're the president. He's heading this up along with, of course, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who've been all over the Middle East trying to bring about peace deals. But the Israelis looking at this, how are they going to be putting all of this into consideration for their own needs, for what's happening in Lebanon, and given that they still believe that Iran is a threat going forward?
Well, every negotiating partner has to come out of the agreement, of the negotiations, with something that they say is good. They've won that part of the agreement, something that's beneficial to them, that reduces the threats that they perceive, and that they can sell to their domestic audiences. That's the only way that negotiations succeed. If you look at Northern Ireland or South Africa or any negotiations in the world, that's how they succeed. So the statements that people make ahead of time are pretty much public relations or jockeying for position. You can ignore them, but it takes time, and we've started the process now, which is really, really important. The Iranians negotiated an agreement with the United States under Obama, a very good agreement, and it was working really well until Trump single-handedly tore it up. So they'll probably go back to something close to that agreement, and maybe there'll be new elements that have to be worked out. I think there's no doubt that both the Americans and the Iranians feel intense pressure to resolve this peacefully, because the price they're paying economically and politically and in terms of their own country's well-being and the global impact of the Strait of Hormuz being limited. This is too much pressure for any country to bear, and so I think they want it to happen. The only country that doesn't want peace agreement is Israel, unfortunately, and this is something that the Israelis are going to have to recognize soon, because the whole world is going to come bearing down on them and saying, you cannot keep doing this. Genocide in Gaza, running amok in the West Bank, killing people, burning hundreds of olive trees, attacking Lebanon, killing 300 people in a day, occupying more territory. The Israelis are totally out of control, and the West has never done anything about it. They're just starting to do that now. Some countries in Europe are speaking out, saying Israel is committing war crimes. We're going to break relations with them. We're not going to allow arms sales to them. So there's pressure starting to build up slowly. But Israel, in the end, has to be reined in and sign an agreement with Lebanon, with the Palestinians, with everybody else. The Arabs are perfectly willing to live peacefully with a Jewish majority Israeli state. It's built into the Arab peace plan of 2002. It's been a long-standing offer that the Arab countries have made, and the Islamic countries. The Israelis and the Americans never replied to it because they didn't want a peace agreement. They wanted Israeli hegemonic dominance in the region, and the Netanyahu government pushed it until they got Trump to conduct this war against Iran, and they've seen the consequences, which are horrific for everybody, not just Israel and Palestine and Lebanon and Iran, but the whole world suffering. So I think the statements that people make now, you should just listen to them with half an ear only, because they adjust their position as they go along. And as you get more serious people involved in the talks, hopefully the Americans will get more serious people to join the discussions, technical people who know them at least really well. And then they can find that middle ground that's pretty elusive right now.
Thank you very much, as always, for your analysis, Rami Khouri there in Boston.